Jake Morrison stood in the massive hall of the Galactic Council. The room was bigger than any building he had ever seen on Earth. Crystal walls stretched up so high that he could barely see the ceiling. Strange lights floated in the air without any support. Alien beings of all shapes and sizes filled the space around him. Jake wore his best military uniform, but he felt very small here. He was Earth's representative to the galaxy. But that did not seem to mean much to the creatures around him. They looked at him like he was some kind of pet that had learned to walk on two legs. The Zephyrians were the first to speak. They looked like living glass sculptures that changed color when they moved. Their leader was called Ambassador Kethvar. His voice came from a machine that turned his thoughts into words that Jake could understand. "Your species is very weak," Kethvar said. His glass body turned red as he spoke. "You have no natural armor like the Korathians. You cannot move things with your mind like the Mindari. Your technology is thousands of years behind the Nexus Collective." Jake looked around the room at the other alien races. The Korathians did look impressive. They were like walking mountains made of rock and metal. Each one was 3 times taller than Jake, and probably 50 times stronger. Their skin was thick armor that could stop bullets. The Mindari floated in the air without touching the ground. They had large heads and thin bodies. Jake had heard they could read minds and move objects just by thinking about them. Some could even see the future. The Nexus Collective representatives were part machine and part living creature. Wires and computer parts stuck out of their bodies. They had replaced their weak flesh with metal and electronics. Their ships could travel across the galaxy in days while human ships took months. "Humans live for such a short time," added a Mindari speaker. Her voice sounded like music, but her words were not kind. "Most of us live for thousands of years. Humans die after less than 100. How can such short-lived creatures ever understand the galaxy?" Dr. Lisa Carter stood next to Jake. She was Earth's top scientist and had spent 3 years studying these alien races. She kept her face calm, but Jake could see anger in her eyes. "We may be different," Lisa said, "but we have survived on our planet for a very long time. Earth has taught us to adapt to any situation." The aliens made sounds that might have been laughter. To them, Earth was a small, unimportant world. Humans had only recently learned to travel between stars. Most alien races had been exploring space for thousands of years before humans even invented the wheel. A Korathian general stepped forward. The floor shook under his massive weight. "Your planet has only one type of intelligent life," he said, in a voice like grinding stone. "Our worlds have dozens of different species working together. You fight wars among your own kind. This shows you are not ready to join the greater galaxy." Jake wanted to argue, but he knew the alien was partly right. Humans did fight each other. Earth had seen countless wars throughout history. Even now, some human nations still had conflicts with each other. But Jake also knew that these wars had taught humans important lessons. The meeting continued for hours. Each alien race explained why humans were too weak to be useful. The thermal seekers said humans were too cold. The crystal singers said human voices could not make the beautiful sounds needed for their technology. The void walkers said humans were too afraid of empty space. By the end of the day, the decision was made. The Galactic Council would classify humans as a Class D species. This was almost the lowest level possible. It meant humans could trade basic goods with other races, but they could not hold important jobs in galactic society. Class D species are not allowed to serve in galactic military forces, Kethvar announced. They cannot hold government positions above the local level. They are not qualified to work on advanced technology projects. Jake felt his heart sink. He had hoped that joining the galactic community would open new opportunities for humanity. Instead, it seemed like humans would be treated as second-class citizens throughout the galaxy. Admiral Rick Hayes was waiting for Jake when he returned to Earth. The old soldier had spent 40 years defending humanity, first in Earth's wars, and now among the stars. His gray hair and scarred hands showed his experience. "How bad is it?" Rick asked, as they walked through the space station orbiting Earth. "Pretty bad," Jake replied. "They think we're basically useless. Too weak, too short-lived, too primitive. We're only good for basic labor and simple trade." Rick nodded slowly. He had expected this outcome. "Let me ask you something, Jake. In all your studies of these alien races, did any of them ever survive something like World War II? Or the Black Death? Or the asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs?" Jake thought about it. Most alien races had evolved on peaceful worlds. They had never faced the constant challenges that shaped human history. Their planets were stable, their climates were mild, and their evolution had been relatively easy. "I don't think so," Jake said. "Most of them reached intelligence without facing major extinction events." "That's what I thought," Rick said with a slight smile. "They've never had to learn what humans know best. Those. They. What's that? How to survive when everything goes wrong. How to fight when you're outgunned. How to win when everyone says you can't." Rick looked out at the stars. "They see our history of war and struggle as proof we're primitive. I see it as proof we're survivors." Lisa Carter joined them in the observation deck. She had been quiet since returning from the council meeting. "I've been thinking about their evaluation," she said. "They measured us against their own strengths. The Korathians are strong, so they think strength is most important. The Mindari have psychic powers, so they value mental abilities. But they never asked what we're good at," Jake realized. "Exactly," Lisa said. "We're not the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. But we might be the most adaptable. Every challenge in Earth's history forced us to change, to grow, to find new solutions." Rick watched a human cargo ship dock with the station. The crew was mixed, with people from every continent on Earth working together. "You know what I think?" he said. "Let them underestimate us. Let them think we're weak. Someday, they might need what they think is weakness." The three humans stood in silence, looking out at the galaxy that had rejected them. None of them knew that their words would prove prophetic. None of them could imagine that in just a few years, the galaxy would discover that humanity's greatest weakness was actually their greatest strength. In the distance, alien ships moved between the stars, carrying their advanced technology and ancient wisdom. They had no idea that somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, an enemy unlike anything they had ever faced was watching and waiting. Captain Steve Martinez was drinking coffee on the bridge of his patrol ship when the universe changed forever. He commanded a small fleet of human vessels near the Outer Rim colonies, the edge of known space where few aliens bothered to travel. It was supposed to be a quiet assignment. The first sign of trouble came from their long-range sensors. Lieutenant Amy Foster was monitoring the equipment when strange readings appeared on her screen. Ships were approaching from beyond the galactic edge, but they did not match any known design. "Captain, we're picking up massive energy signatures," Amy reported. "I count at least 50 vessels, but they're bigger than anything in our database." Steve set down his coffee and moved to look at her screen. The ships were enormous, bigger than the largest Korathian dreadnoughts. Their design was angular and harsh, covered in spikes and weapon ports. They moved with purpose, heading straight for the nearest inhabited system. "Send a message to Galactic Command," Steve ordered. "Tell them we have unknown vessels entering Council space." Before Amy could send the message, explosions lit up the darkness ahead of them. The Korathian patrol fleet that guarded this sector was under attack. Steve watched in horror as massive beams of energy tore through the rock-armored ships like they were made of paper. The Korathian vessels tried to fight back. Their weapons were among the most powerful in the galaxy, designed to crack planets. But their shots barely scratched the hulls of the attacking ships. Within minutes, the entire Korathian fleet was destroyed. "My God," Amy whispered. "They just wiped out a full battle group in less than 5 minutes." The attacking ships turned toward the human patrol fleet. Steve knew his small vessels could not fight these monsters. But he had to warn the galaxy. He ordered his ships to scatter and run for the nearest communication relay. The enemy ships were called Vorthans, though Steve would not learn this name for several hours. They came from beyond the galactic rim, a species that had turned themselves into living weapons. Half of their bodies were machine, half were still flesh. They had cybernetic enhancements that made them stronger than Corathians and smarter than the Nexus Collective. But their greatest advantage was their networked intelligence. Every Vorthan soldier was connected to every other through their cybernetic implants. They could share knowledge instantly across their entire army. When one Vorthan learned something new, they all learned it. The first reports reached Earth 3 days later. Admiral Rick Hayes read them in his office at Fleet Command, his face growing darker with each page. The Vorthans were cutting through the galaxy's defenses like a hot knife through butter. They hit the Zephyrian homeworld yesterday, reported Colonel Ben Parker. 17 billion casualties in the first 6 hours. The Zephyrians tried to use their energy manipulation powers, but the Vorthans adapted to counter them within minutes. Rick studied the tactical maps on his wall. Red marks showed Vorthan positions, advancing deeper into galactic space every day. The aliens who had dismissed humans as too weak were falling one by one to an enemy that seemed unstoppable. What about the Mindari? Rick asked. The Vorthan's cybernetic minds can't be read or influenced by psychic powers, Ben replied. The Mindari fleet at Kelsor Prime was destroyed without scoring a single hit. On the front lines, the war was even worse than the reports suggested. Commander Jake Morrison found himself on the embattled world of Kepler Prime, trying to organize an evacuation of Zephyrian civilians. The proud crystal beings who had once looked down on humans now huddled in human transport ships, begging for protection. Please, one young Zephyrian said to Jake, his crystal body flickering with fear. Our military is gone. Our leaders are dead. Can your ships take us to safety? Jake looked at the thousands of alien refugees crowding the spaceport. His human vessels were designed for cargo, not passengers, but they were the only ships available. The advanced Zephyrian transports had all been destroyed in the first wave of attacks. We'll make room, Jake promised. Load as many as you can into each ship. The evacuation was dangerous. Vorthan fighters patrolled the skies, hunting for any ships trying to escape. But human pilots had learned to fly low and fast, using the planet's mountains and valleys to hide from enemy sensors. Pilot Greg Turner flew one of the evacuation ships, a converted cargo hauler packed with Zephyrian families. He had been a delivery driver on Earth before joining the space fleet. Now he was risking his life to save aliens who had once considered him inferior. This is crazy, Greg muttered as Vorthan fighters screamed overhead. 6 months ago, these guys wouldn't even let me into their fancy council meetings. Now, I'm their taxi service. But Greg kept flying. That was what humans did. They helped others, even when those others had treated them badly. The Vorthans were learning about human behavior through their captured intelligence networks. Their analysis computers tried to understand why humans would risk themselves for aliens who had shown them no respect. The logical conclusion was that humans were too stupid to recognize when they were being used. This was the Vorthans' first mistake. They assumed that human kindness was weakness, just like the Galactic Council had. They could not understand that helping others made humans stronger, not weaker. Dr. Lisa Carter was working around the clock in a secret research facility, trying to find a weakness in Vorthan technology. She had samples of their weapons and armor, recovered from battlefields across the galaxy. Her team included scientists from a dozen different species, all working together to solve the puzzle. Their cybernetic enhancements are incredibly advanced, Lisa explained to her team. They can adapt to any attack pattern within minutes. Their network allows them to share information instantly across vast distances. A Nexus Collective researcher raised a metal arm. Our own cybernetic technology cannot match theirs. How did they achieve such integration between flesh and machine? That's not the right question, Lisa said. We shouldn't try to match their strengths. Lisa had been studying the Vorthan network architecture. The enemy's greatest strength might also be their greatest vulnerability. If every Vorthan was connected to every other, then the network had to process enormous amounts of information every second. "Look at this," Lisa said, pointing to her computer screen. "Their network operates on pure logic and efficiency. It's designed to handle predictable input and produce optimal responses." "So?" asked a Mindari scientist. "So what happens when you feed it unpredictable input? What happens when the network encounters something that doesn't follow logical patterns?" The other scientists began to understand. The Vorthans had conquered the galaxy because every species they faced fought in logical, predictable ways. The Korathians used brute force. The Zephyrians relied on energy manipulation. The Mindari employed psychic powers. But humans were different. Human history was full of illogical decisions, desperate gambles, and strategies that made no sense to anyone, except the people using them. Meanwhile, the war continued to rage across the galaxy. Planet after planet fell to the Vorthan advance. The great civilizations that had ruled space for thousands of years were crumbling in weeks. On Earth, civilians watched the news with growing fear. The government tried to stay calm, but everyone could see that the galaxy's mightiest powers were losing badly. If the Korathians and Zephyrians could not stop the Vorthans, what chance did humanity have? Admiral Hayes called a meeting of his top officers. They gathered in the war room, surrounded by maps and tactical displays. The red markers, showing Vorthan positions, were getting closer to Earth every day. "Gentlemen, ladies," Rick said, "it's time to face facts. The galaxy is losing this war. Every major power has been defeated, or is in retreat. The Vorthans will reach human space within weeks." "What are our orders, Admiral?" asked Captain Laura Swift. Rick looked around the room at his officers. These men and women represented the species that the galaxy had labeled as weak and useless. In a few weeks, they might be the only military force left standing. "We prepare for war," Rick said. "And we remember that sometimes the biggest advantage comes from being underestimated." In the darkness of space, Vorthan fleets continued their advance toward Earth. Their computers calculated that humanity would surrender quickly once they saw the fate of stronger species. After all, if the mighty Korathians could not resist, how could the weak humans even try? The Vorthans had studied human military history through captured databases. They saw countless wars, failed strategies, and tactical disasters. They concluded that humans were poor fighters who succeeded only through luck and superior numbers. This was their second mistake. They looked at human defeats and saw weakness. They failed to notice that humans kept fighting, no matter how many times they lost. They missed the most important fact about human warfare. Humans never stayed defeated for long. Colonel Dan Rodriguez crouched behind a pile of rubble on the mining world of Sigma 7, watching Vorthan soldiers advance through the ruined city. His mixed unit of human marines and alien refugees was badly outnumbered, but Dan was not worried about the odds. He was thinking about the problem. The Vorthans adapt quickly to standard military tactics. Dan explained to his squad over the radio. "So, we don't use standard tactics." His team included humans, 3 surviving Zephyrian warriors, and a young Korathian who had lost his unit in the first attack. The aliens looked confused. Their military training taught them to follow proven strategies that had worked for thousands of years. "What do you mean?" asked the Korathian, whose name was Stonebreaker. Dan smiled. "Human military doctrine is different. Rule 1. If it's stupid and it works, it's not stupid. Rule 2. The enemy cannot predict your plan if you don't have a plan." The Vorthans were advancing in perfect formation, their cybernetic minds calculating the best approach to eliminate the defenders. Their network had analyzed every major battle in galactic history and determined the optimal strategy for this situation. But Dan did not give them a normal battle. Instead of meeting their advance with defensive fire, he ordered his team to split up and attack from 6 different directions at once. Instead of using their best weapons first, they started with makeshift explosives and improvised traps. The human Marines moved like hunters instead of soldiers. They used the mining equipment as weapons, turning industrial lasers into artillery and cargo haulers into armored vehicles. They fought dirty, using every trick they had learned in Earth's countless wars. The Vorthan's network struggled to process this chaotic input. Their algorithms were designed to counter logical military strategies, not the wild improvisation of desperate humans. When they adapted to counter one human tactic, the humans had already switched to something completely different. Dr. Lisa Carter was watching the battle through satellite feeds from her research bunker. She had been studying Vorthan behavior for weeks, looking for patterns in their adaptive responses. What she saw on Sigma-7 confirmed her theories. "Look at this," Lisa said to her research team. "The Vorthan response time is increasing. Their network is having trouble processing the human tactics." A Mindari scientist studied the data with his large, ancient eyes. "But the humans are not following any logical pattern. How can chaos be more effective than order?" "Because chaos is a pattern too," Lisa explained. "It's just a pattern that computer networks can't easily predict or counter." Lisa had been diving deep into human psychology and military history. What the aliens saw as weakness, she was beginning to understand as strength. Humans were not logical like machines. They made decisions based on emotion, instinct, and gut feelings that could not be programmed into any computer. "The Vorthan's network processes information like a computer," Lisa continued. "It looks for patterns, makes predictions, and calculates optimal responses. But human decision-making includes quantum variables that no computer can process." "What kind of variables?" asked a Nexus Collective scientist. "Fear, anger, love, desperation, hope, stubbornness," Lisa said. "These emotions create infinite possibilities in split-second decisions. The Vorthans can't predict us because we don't even predict ourselves." Back on Sigma-7, Dan's crazy tactics were working. His small force had destroyed 3 Vorthan units and was still fighting. The enemy kept adapting to counter his strategies, but he kept changing faster than they could adjust. "Rodriguez to all units," Dan called over the radio. "We're going to try something really stupid now. Everyone grab mining charges and follow me." The plan was insane. Dan wanted to collapse the mine shafts under the Vorthan advance, trapping their main force underground. It would also trap his own team, but Dan figured they could blast their way out later. Probably. The Zephyrian warriors thought the plan was suicide. The Korathian was certain it would fail. But the human Marines just shrugged and started planting explosives. "You realize this will likely kill us all," Stonebreaker pointed out. "Yeah, probably," agreed Sergeant Nicole Adams, a tough woman from Texas. "But it'll definitely kill them. And that's what matters." This was something the Vorthans could not understand. Their logical minds calculated survival probability for every action. When the odds were bad, they retreated and tried a different approach. But humans would charge into certain death if they thought it would help their friends or hurt their enemies. The mining charges exploded in sequence, and half the mountain came down on the Vorthan army. Dan's team survived by hiding in the deeper shafts, then spent 2 days digging their way back to the surface. When they emerged, they found that their stupid plan had eliminated the entire enemy force on the planet. Word of the victory spread quickly through human military networks. Other commanders began studying Dan's tactics and applying them to their own battles. But they did not copy his exact methods. Instead, they used his approach. Stay unpredictable, fight dirty, and never do what the enemy expects. On Earth, engineer Tom Bradley was working with a team of designers to modify human ships and weapons. Unlike other species who built equipment for specific purposes, humans had always created tools that could be adapted for multiple uses. "We're not the strongest or the smartest," Tom explained to his tired team, "but we're the most flexible. Every human ship can be a fighter, a transport, a hospital, or a bomb if we need it to be." Human technology had always been built this way. Earth's harsh environment and constant wars had taught humans to make equipment that could be fixed, modified, and repurposed in the field. A cargo ship could become a warship with a few hours of work. A mining laser could be turned into a weapon. Even kitchen equipment could be made into explosives. The Vorthans found this impossible to understand. Their technology was highly specialized and perfectly efficient. Each piece of equipment had one purpose and performed that purpose better than anything else in the galaxy. But human technology was messy, improvised, and adaptable. Captain Laura Swift commanded the destroyer USS Defiance when it encountered 3 Vorthan dreadnoughts near Jupiter. Her ship was tiny compared to the enemy vessels, armed with weapons that were thousands of years behind Vorthan technology. Any logical analysis said she should retreat immediately. Instead, Laura did something no military academy in the galaxy would have approved. She rammed her ship between 2 of the dreadnoughts and set off her cargo bay full of nuclear mines. The explosion disabled all 3 enemy ships and heavily damaged the Defiance. Laura's crew spent the next 6 hours jury-rigging life support and engines from spare parts. They limped back to Earth with a victory that should have been impossible. "How did you know that would work?" Admiral Hayes asked Laura when she reported back. "I didn't," Laura admitted. "But I knew running away definitely wouldn't work, so I tried something crazy instead." This was becoming a pattern in human victories. Faced with impossible odds, human commanders would try strategies that made no logical sense. Sometimes these plans failed horribly, but sometimes they worked. And when they worked, they achieved results that stunned the galaxy. The Vorthans began studying human psychology, trying to understand this strange species that seemed to get stronger when things went wrong. Their analysis revealed something disturbing. Humans did not fight to win. They fought to keep fighting. Most species in the galaxy would surrender when defeat became certain. It was logical to preserve life and resources for a better opportunity later. But humans would fight to the death just to make the enemy pay a price for victory. A Vorthan intelligence report stated, "Human military behavior defies logical analysis. When faced with superior force, they do not retreat. When surrounded, they do not surrender. When their position becomes hopeless, they become more dangerous, not less." This species appears to treat impossible odds as a personal insult rather than a reason for withdrawal. The Vorthan's network began having processing errors when trying to predict human behavior. How could a species survive by making consistently illogical decisions? How could weakness become strength? How could chaos defeat order? Dr. Carter found the answer in human evolution. While other species had evolved in stable environments, humans had survived through constant change and challenge. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and predators had shaped human development for millions of years. "We're not logical because logic wasn't enough on Earth," Lisa explained to a gathering of refugee scientists. "Our planet tried to kill us in every possible way, so we learned to adapt to anything. Other species optimized for their environments. We optimized for change itself. This was humanity's secret weapon. They were not built for any specific challenge, but for the ability to meet any challenge. They could not outfight the Korathians or outthink the Mindari, but they could outadapt anyone in the galaxy." As news of human victories spread, something unexpected began happening. Alien survivors started asking to serve under human commanders. The species that had once dismissed humans as weak were now begging to learn human tactics. Colonel Rodriguez found himself training a mixed unit of warriors from a dozen different species. They struggled to understand his methods, but they were desperate enough to try anything. "Forget everything your military academies taught you," Dan told his new students. Rule number 1. The best plan survives contact with the enemy for about 5 seconds. Rule number 2. When your plan fails, make up something worse, and try that instead. The aliens looked confused, but they were learning. Slowly, the galaxy was discovering that sometimes the greatest strength comes from being willing to fail, adapt, and try again. And humans, the species everyone thought was too weak to matter, were the best teachers for this lesson. General Chris Walker stood on the observation deck of Earth's orbital defense station, watching the largest enemy fleet in galactic history approach his home planet. The Vorthan armada filled the sky with thousands of ships, each one larger and more powerful than anything humanity had ever built. "Sir, we're receiving surrender demands from the Vorthan fleet commander," reported Lieutenant Tony Rivera. Chris looked at the message on his screen. The Vorthans offered standard terms: immediate surrender, relocation of human population to designated worlds, and integration into their empire as a labor force. It was more mercy than they had shown most species. "Send them our reply," Chris said calmly. "Tell them that Earth doesn't surrender. Tell them that if they want our planet, they're welcome to try and take it." The Vorthans had expected this response. Their analysis of human psychology indicated that this species would fight even when defeat was certain. But they had conquered dozens of worlds with desperate defenders. They calculated that Earth's resistance would collapse within hours of the first orbital bombardment. They were about to learn that Earth was different from every other world in the galaxy. The battle began when Vorthan ships entered Earth's atmosphere. They expected to face organized military resistance from defensive positions and space stations. Instead, they encountered something unprecedented: an entire planet that refused to die quietly. Human fighters did not retreat when their ships were damaged. They aimed their crippled vessels at enemy targets and rammed them. When their weapons stopped working, pilots used their ships as guided missiles. When their engines failed, they waited in dead hulks for enemy ships to come close enough for boarding actions. Sergeant Nicole Adams led her squad through the ruins of New York City, using the urban environment like a weapon. The Vorthan's superior technology meant little in close-quarters combat, where human determination and creativity could shine. "They're trying to establish a command post in Central Park," Adams reported over her radio. "We're going to stop them." Her plan was typically human, completely insane, and just crazy enough to work. She had rigged the city's subway system with explosives, turning the underground tunnels into a massive trap. When the Vorthans moved their heavy equipment into the park, Adams triggered the charges. The explosion collapsed half of Manhattan's underground, swallowing 3 Vorthan battalions and their command vehicles. Adams and her team barely escaped through maintenance tunnels they had prepared weeks earlier. "Central Park is clear," she reported. "Also, we don't have a subway system anymore. Hope nobody was planning to use it." This was happening all across Earth. Humans were not just fighting the Vorthans. They were making it as expensive as possible for the enemy to claim any victory. Every street became a battlefield. Every building became a fortress. Every civilian became a potential combatant. In Los Angeles, factory worker Maria Santos led a group of refugees armed with nothing but industrial tools. They faced Vorthan soldiers equipped with advanced armor and energy weapons. The logical outcome was obvious. But Maria's people knew the city like the Vorthans never could. They used construction equipment as weapons, turning bulldozers into tanks and cranes into artillery platforms. They flooded the storm drains to create underwater ambush points. They even weaponized the traffic system, causing massive accidents to block Vorthan advances. The Vorthan's adaptive algorithms began showing serious strain. They were designed to counter military tactics, not the chaotic resistance of an entire population that treated war like a neighborhood fight where anything goes. Captain Steve Martinez commanded a fleet of converted civilian ships high above Earth. Shop owners, miners, teachers, and retirees had volunteered to fly cargo haulers and passenger transports against the most advanced military force the galaxy had ever seen. "This is insane," called out pilot Greg Turner over the radio. He was flying a converted ice cream truck with missile pods welded to the sides. "We're supposed to be the weak ones, remember?" "Yeah. Well," replied Captain Jennifer Stone, from her position in a weaponized school bus that had somehow made it to orbit. "Turns out weak and stupid are 2 different things." The Vorthan's logical minds could not process what they were seeing. According to all tactical analysis, Earth's defenders should have been routed hours ago. Instead, human resistance was getting stronger as the battle continued. This defied every military principle the Vorthans knew. Normally, casualties and losses would weaken an enemy's resolve, but humans seemed to fight harder when they were losing, become more dangerous when they were desperate, and treat impossible odds as a personal challenge. In Washington, D.C., President Sarah Miller coordinated the global defense from a bunker deep underground. She was connected to resistance leaders on every continent, and the reports she received were both terrible and inspiring. Beijing has fallen, but the survivors have retreated to the mountains and are still fighting, reported General Kim from Asia. Tokyo is burning, but the harbor is completely blocked with sunken ships. The Vorthans can't land reinforcements there. What about Europe? Sarah asked. London is holding. Paris has been evacuated, but the underground resistance is making the Vorthans pay for every block. Moscow. Well, Moscow is being Moscow. The Russians have turned the entire city into a giant trap. Sarah looked at the global tactical display. Red zones showed areas under Vorthan control. But even the red zones were flickering, as human resistance continued behind enemy lines. It was not victory, but it was not defeat either. The Vorthans faced a problem they had never encountered before. On every other world they had conquered, defeating the military meant defeating the planet. But Earth had no single point of failure. Every human was a potential soldier. Every city was a potential battlefield. Every defeat just made the survivors angrier. Admiral Rick Hayes coordinated naval operations from his flagship, the carrier Washington. His fleet was badly outnumbered, but they were fighting in Earth's oceans, which gave them a significant advantage. The Vorthans don't understand water warfare, Rick explained to his captains. Their ships are designed for space combat. They're having trouble adapting to ocean conditions. Human submarines struck at Vorthan vessels like sharks, appearing from the depths to launch torpedoes, and then disappearing before the enemy could respond. The aliens' advanced sensors worked poorly underwater, and their energy weapons lost effectiveness in the dense medium. Sir, the Pacific Fleet reports they've sunk 12 enemy transports, reported Commander Jake Morrison. We've lost 8 submarines, but we took down a lot more than that. Rick nodded grimly. The mathematics of the battle were still against humanity, but humans were making the Vorthans pay a price that their logical minds found disturbing. Every human victory, no matter how small, proved that the invaders were not invincible. In rural areas, farmers and ranchers formed guerrilla units that harassed Vorthan supply lines. They used hunting rifles against armored soldiers, set forest fires to block enemy advances, and poisoned water supplies to deny resources to the invaders. Old Pete Morrison, a cattle rancher from Montana, led a group of cowboys in a series of raids against a Vorthan fuel depot. Their weapons were ancient by galactic standards, but they knew the terrain better than any alien computer. These boys don't understand the American West, Pete said, as he planned another attack. Out here, you don't fight fair. You fight to win. His raids destroyed enough fuel to ground an entire Vorthan air wing. When enemy soldiers finally cornered his band, Pete and his cowboys fought to the last man, taking dozens of Vorthans with them. The Vorthan's network began experiencing cascade failures as it tried to process the illogical human responses. Their algorithms were designed for predictable military conflicts between organized forces. They could not adapt to a species that turned every civilian into a combatant and every defeat into a motivation for revenge. A Vorthan intelligence report stated, "Human resistance does not follow standard patterns. Destruction of military assets does not reduce combat effectiveness. Civilian casualties increase rather than decrease enemy morale. Tactical victories provide no strategic advantage. This species appears to possess an unknown form of collective insanity that makes them stronger under stress." Dr. Lisa Carter was working frantically in her underground laboratory, trying to find a weapon that could turn the tide of battle. She had been studying Vorthan technology for months, looking for any weakness that humans could exploit. "Their network is overloading," Lisa reported to General Walker. "The chaotic input from human tactics is causing processing errors throughout their command structure. Can we use that somehow? Walker asked. I'm working on it. If we can feed their network enough contradictory information at once, we might be able to crash their entire command system. Lisa's plan required coordination between every human unit on the planet. At exactly the same moment, every human commander would execute a different crazy strategy. The Vorthan's network would try to adapt to all of them simultaneously, potentially causing a system overload. It was a desperate gamble, but humans specialized in desperate gambits. As the battle for Earth entered its second day, both sides were exhausted. The Vorthans controlled large parts of the planet, but they had paid a higher price than for any previous conquest. Their casualty rates were 10 times higher than their worst projections. More importantly, they were beginning to understand that conquering Earth's cities would not end human resistance. These strange creatures would keep fighting from caves, forests, and ruins until every last one of them was dead. For the first time in their expansion across the galaxy, the Vorthans faced an enemy that might cost more to defeat than the victory was worth. And in the depths of space, monitoring stations detected something that made the situation even worse. Human reinforcement fleets were approaching from the outer colonies. Earth's children were coming home to join the fight. Captain Jennifer Stone stood on the bridge of the badly damaged Earth battleship New Horizon, looking at the Vorthan command ship through her cracked view screen. Her vessel was held together with spare parts and desperate hope, but it was still fighting after 3 days of the most brutal space combat in galactic history. The Vorthan fleet had come to Earth expecting a quick victory over a weak species. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a grinding battle of attrition with an enemy that refused to admit defeat. Human losses were enormous, but Vorthan casualties were climbing even higher. Open a channel to the Vorthan flagship, Jennifer ordered her communications officer. Lieutenant Carlos Rivera looked surprised. Ma'am, are you surrendering? Not exactly, Jennifer said with a grim smile. I'm going to make them an offer they can't refuse. The main screen flickered to life, showing the Vorthan fleet commander. He was a terrifying figure, more machine than flesh, with glowing red eyes and metal plates covering most of his face. His cybernetic enhancements made him stronger and smarter than any natural being, but they also made him predictably logical. Human vessel, you will surrender immediately, the Vorthan commander stated. Your resistance is futile. Your planet will fall within hours. Jennifer laughed, a sound that seemed to confuse the alien. You want Earth? Sure. You can have it. But let me explain what you'll get. She activated her tactical display, showing the Vorthan commander the current state of the battle. Most of Earth's major cities were in ruins. Millions of humans were dead. By any logical standard, the planet was defeated. You'll get a dead world covered in radioactive ruins, Jennifer continued. Because we've rigged every major city with nuclear devices. You kill us, you get nothing but a toxic wasteland that will glow in the dark for the next 1,000 years. The Vorthan commander's cybernetic brain processed this information rapidly. His logical mind calculated probability matrices and strategic outcomes. The conclusion was disturbing. Humans were actually insane enough to follow through on their threat. You would destroy your own world rather than accept defeat? The Vorthan asked. Yep, Jennifer replied cheerfully. We're funny that way. If we can't have it, nobody can. This was the moment when the Vorthans finally understood what they were fighting. Not soldiers defending territory, but a species that viewed mutual destruction as an acceptable outcome. Their logical minds could not process the concept of victory through annihilation. The standoff lasted for 6 hours, while Vorthan leaders debated their options. Their network ran countless scenarios, but every analysis reached the same conclusion. Humans would rather die fighting than live under alien rule. Finally, the Vorthan fleet began withdrawing from Earth's atmosphere. They had won most of the tactical battles, but they had lost the strategic war. Earth would cost more to hold than it was worth, and the humans had proven they would make the price of occupation impossibly high. Admiral Rick Hayes watched the alien ships retreat from his command bunker, hardly believing what he was seeing. After 4 days of desperate fighting, the most powerful military force in galactic history was giving up and going home. "Sir, we're receiving messages from the surviving colonial fleets," reported Commander Jake Morrison. "They want to know if Earth needs reinforcements." Rick almost laughed. Earth was in ruins, its population devastated, its cities burning. But somehow, impossibly, humanity had won. "Tell them we're fine," Rick said. "Tell them to head back to their stations. Earth can handle itself." 3 months later, Admiral Hayes stood in the rebuilt Galactic Council chambers, addressing the same alien species that had once dismissed humanity as weak and useless. The chamber was much quieter than before. Many civilizations had suffered devastating losses to the Vorthans, and several species had been completely wiped out. "The Galactic Council's classification system needs serious revision," Hayes stated calmly to the assembled delegates. "You measured our strength by comparing us to your own advantages. You never asked what humans were actually good at." Ambassador Kethvar's crystal form was now scarred and dim, bearing the marks of Vorthon weapons. His proud species had lost billions in the war, saved only by human evacuation fleets that had risked everything to help their former critics. "Admiral Hayes," Kethvar said with something that might have been humility, "what are humans good at?" Rick thought about the question for a moment. "Surviving when we shouldn't. Adapting when others can't. Fighting impossible odds. Making weapons out of kitchen equipment. Turning our weaknesses into advantages. And most importantly, never knowing when to quit." Dr. Lisa Carter presented her research to the Council, showing detailed analysis of how human psychological traits had proven decisive in the war. Her data demonstrated that emotional processing, short lifespans, and biological fragility had actually created a species uniquely suited to rapid adaptation and unconventional problem-solving. Every species in this galaxy evolved to master their environment, Lisa explained to the fascinated alien delegates. Humans evolved to master change itself. We're not the strongest, fastest, or smartest species here, but we might be the most dangerous because we never stop trying to overcome our limitations. The evidence was overwhelming. While other species had optimized for specific advantages, humans had developed the ability to function effectively in any situation. Their chaotic decision-making process, driven by emotion and instinct, produced responses that no computer could predict or counter. A Mindari scholar raised a thin hand. "Dr. Carter, our analysis suggests that human emotional responses create quantum variables in decision-making. Is this correct?" Exactly," Lisa confirmed. "Human consciousness operates on multiple levels simultaneously. We process logical information, but we also factor in emotional data, instinctive responses, and random variables that create infinite possibilities in any given moment. This was why the Vorthans had failed. Their advanced network could adapt to any logical strategy, but it could not predict or counter the controlled chaos of human tactical thinking." Commander Morrison, now bearing scars from a dozen battles, addressed a mixed unit of human and alien soldiers. The old prejudices had been burned away in the fires of war, replaced by mutual respect earned through shared struggle. "The galaxy learned something important during this war," Morrison told his troops. "Strength and weakness aren't about what you're born with. They're about what you do when everything goes wrong and the universe seems to be against you." His unit included survivors from dozens of species. Korathians who had learned human flexibility. Zephyrians, who now understood the value of emotional decision-making, and Mindari who had discovered that sometimes instinct was better than logic. The Galactic Council voted unanimously to reclassify humanity. No longer were they a Class D support species. The new classification was unique in galactic history. Class X, representing unpredictable variables capable of achieving impossible outcomes. Class X species will be granted full membership in all galactic institutions, announced the council speaker. They will be offered leadership positions in military, scientific, and diplomatic roles. Their expertise in adaptive strategy and crisis management will be highly valued." End quote. It was a complete reversal of humanity's status. The species that had been dismissed as too weak to matter was now being courted as essential to galactic security. But the real change was deeper than official classifications. Across the galaxy, alien species were studying human methods and trying to understand the secret of their success. Military academies revised their curricula to include human tactical philosophy. Scientists began researching the benefits of emotional decision-making. Captain Laura Swift, now commanding a mixed fleet of human and alien vessels, found herself teaching advanced tactics to officers who had once considered her primitive. "The key to human strategy," Laura explained to her students, "is accepting that your plan will fail. Once you know that failure is inevitable, you can prepare for it. You build flexibility into everything you do. You train for chaos instead of order." The alien officers struggled with these concepts. Their cultures had spent millennia perfecting efficient, logical approaches to every problem. Learning to embrace chaos and uncertainty was like learning to breathe underwater. Dr. Carter established the Institute for Adaptive Sciences on Earth, drawing researchers from across the galaxy. Her mission was to study the intersection between emotional processing and tactical effectiveness, developing new approaches to problem-solving that combined human intuition with alien logic. "We're not trying to make other species more like humans," Lisa explained to her diverse research team. "We're trying to understand how different types of intelligence can work together to solve impossible problems." The research was groundbreaking. Teams that included humans consistently outperformed purely logical or purely emotional approaches. The combination of human creativity with alien expertise produced innovations that neither could achieve alone. 5 years after the Vorthan War, the galaxy was a very different place. The rigid hierarchies and species classifications that had dominated for millennia were breaking down. Mixed crews were becoming common on ships throughout known space. The Vorthans themselves had not been destroyed, but they had been changed by their encounter with humanity. Their logical network, damaged by exposure to human chaos, had developed something resembling creativity. Some Vorthan units had even begun displaying behavior that could only be called emotional. Admiral Hayes, now Director of Galactic Defense, reviewed reports from across the known galaxy. Human advisors were helping alien civilizations develop more flexible approaches to governance, military strategy, and scientific research. The species that had once been labeled as weak was now teaching the galaxy how to be strong. "You know what I find funny?" Rick said to his old friend Jake Morrison. "They spent so much time cataloging our weaknesses that they never noticed our strengths." Jake nodded. "Maybe that's the most human trait of all. We look weak until someone needs us to be strong." As the ceremony concluded and representatives returned to their homeworlds, one truth had become clear across the galaxy. Humanity's greatest strength had always been their willingness to help others, even when those others had shown them no respect or kindness. The species that had been dismissed as too primitive and emotional to matter had saved the galaxy not through superior weapons or technology, but through something far more powerful: the absolute refusal to give up, no matter how hopeless the situation appeared. In the end, the galaxy learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes from being constantly underestimated by those who mistake different kinds of power for weakness. And humans, the weak ones, had proven that weakness and strength were really just matters of perspective.